Good evening, friends. Welcome to my channel. I am Dr. Sridhar Kalyanasundaram, consultant neonatologist and pediatrician. Today, we will be starting a very important session. All of us are eager to know more about the novel coronavirus infection, or COVID-19, as it is called. And I'm sure it will be a useful session. I'll have an overview of the problem in the first 20 minutes or so, and then we will answer any questions that you may have. Some of you have already sent in questions on the topic, and thank you for that. And I'm sure I'll address them as we go on. So I hope you can hear me well. Please, any of you can mention if you can hear me. I suppose you can hear me. So I'll start by just giving an overview of what this infection is about. So it has been a very difficult year for us. 2020 looks like it's a year to be forgotten for majority of us. So we have had the pandemic starting. It was declared as a pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 11th to be exact. This virus originated in Wuhan in China in early December. China is being criticized for their steps. I mean, especially not taking restraining measures in terms of overseas flights and not informing the world adequately. Obviously, it's always easier to talk in retrospect, but at the same time, we have to have an open mind so that we avoid such issues in the future. So apparently, the virus originated in bats and it developed a mutant form. I'll be discussing about the virus in the next next part of the talk. But once the virus spread, it started attacking many people, and many people were hospitalized, many lives were lost. During this time, people were still flying out of Wuhan, and in the late January period, it started being reported in other parts of the world, including in UAE. Occasional cases were there. In March, it was clearly recognized that it was spreading all over the world. Community spread was also being noted in many places. So the current number as we speak is crossed 32 million cases around the world. Such a whooping number. And just imagine we were just starting to look at the tracker on the Worldometer in early March, looking at it jumping like 5,000 a day for the whole world and imagining that it's a huge thing. But now we are talking of 100,000 a day or even more in each country, even which is severely affected like India and Brazil. We have had a very good measure in most of the countries. So lockdowns were introduced. The main reason for the lockdown being introduced was to limit the spread, to slow down the spread, so people could, the governments could take action, the healthcare centers could take measures to increase their intensive care capacity. Most countries had not faced such a huge pandemic since the Spanish flu. It was in 1920s, and of course, medicine has advanced a lot. Intensive care has advanced a lot in all these periods, and we really can't take any life for granted. So we can't give up on any case, and that has been the motto. We saw to our horror in the mid-March to late May period that many of the European countries as well as the United States were overwhelmed by the number of intensive care admissions. So we had a great difficulty with the number of cases, people describing it as an explosion in cases. And we have reports from Italy which have confirmed how difficult it was for the healthcare professionals. We also had many of the frontline staff being significantly affected. Now we have been 6 months into the pandemic, more than 6 months into the pandemic. We have had a huge financial implication. Each one of us has been hit, some of us in a very major way. Many of us have lost their jobs, have had to relocate to their home countries. And the lockdown period, every industry was hit, productivity was hit. And even as a healthcare professionals, our routine changed. For example, as a neonatologist, we stopped seeing acute cases in the outpatient clinic, and we had to actually turn away some of our regular patients with acute illnesses. And thank you for understanding that. And thank you for all your support during this period. As we have seen the virus developing, we have got a little more knowledge of what's happening. And that's why I'm doing this session today, to share with you what information we have, especially as it relates to the infection in children. I'll start by giving a little outline of what viruses are. As we have discussed in the videos that I've made on infections, we have bacteria and viruses as the predominant sources of infection. Whether we can call viruses as living organisms itself is doubtful because a virus cannot survive on its own. It has a genetic material, it can encourage the body to produce the material needed to multiply. It can spread from cell to cell, it can spread from organism to organism or animal to animal. And the genetic material is what makes it very dangerous. And viruses have caused multiple diseases. Most of the time, when physicians talk to patients as a viral infection, we are not talking of very serious infections. We tend to reassure them saying it's a mild viral infection which is likely to go away. And this is one way to discourage the use of antibiotics, because viral infections do not respond to antibiotics. There is no need to use antibiotics. So coronavirus is a type of virus. It has been described since the 1960s, and there are many different types of coronaviruses. The CDC classifies 7 coronavirus species, mainly the alpha and beta subtypes, as causing human disease. Only 4 subtypes were described previously, but since early 2000s, we have had the SARS-1 episode, which is a severe acute respiratory syndrome 1, which originated from China as well. And we have the Middle East respiratory syndrome, which was more recent in our memory. It was a milder episode. It was related to the organism getting modified in the camel species. Both these were characterized by severe virulence. So the attack was significant. We had intensive care admissions, but thankfully it was curtailed quite early and it didn't spread to these proportions. The novel coronavirus infection is the 7th coronavirus that has been described to cause human infection. And it is novel because it's a virus which was known to attack bats before. It has undergone a change, whether it is a natural change, whether it is a lab induced change, it's still open to conjecture, and I don't want to delve into controversy here. However, we should understand that the novel coronavirus is a totally new battle for the human race, because we have never been exposed to a virus of this nature. We are all naive to it, we don't have any immunity to it, and that's the reason that it has caused this pandemic. We have specific features of the bat virus which was modified. As I said, it could be a mutation in nature as well. The angiotensin converting enzyme is an enzyme which is present in our body. It has a function on the blood vessel wall reactivity. It also has a function in the kidneys. This enzyme has receptors on our blood vessel walls, in the respiratory cell walls, the mucosal lining, and all over. And these receptors normally do not bind this virus, but the virus has adapted a way in which it can bind to these receptors, and so it can find a way into the human body. And that is the big change which happened, which made this virus attack humans. And once it started attacking humans, all of us are at risk, and it has started spreading in a huge way. And because our body is naive to the virus, our immune system doesn't know how to handle, how to contain the virus. Sometimes it results in a huge inflammatory cascade. And this has resulted in the pulmonary problems, the severe lung disease that was notified. It also causes a cardiac involvement, it causes multi-system involvement. And our own body's defense mechanism causes that cascade, as we call it. One event rolls on into the other event, and we have a huge problem. And this leads to the need for intensive care admission. And that is one of the most important features of this infection. How does it spread? So, like any viral infection, droplet spread and aerosol spread are the common ways. So, when we say droplets, it's the droplets that are generated when we cough, when we sneeze, and even when we speak. Obviously, the number of viral particles in the droplets varies depending on the action. As I said, a mild whispering doesn't spread much. If you are talking in a conversational voice like I'm doing now, it reaches a distance of, say, 1 meter. If you are speaking louder, it may reach 2 meters. However, if you are coughing or sneezing, it may reach, the particles may float in the air, and it may reach even up to 5 to 6 meters. So if you are in an elevator and somebody is coughing or sneezing, that's definitely a significant problem. And try to get away from that place if possible. That's why people are worried about elevators. We'll come to that later. And obviously, spread through the droplets is a mainstay. The droplet sediment on surfaces, there was a lot of debate on whether it spreads from surfaces. Of course, the extent of infection, the dose of the virus getting into us is lower if we get through surface contact. And that is the reason we are advising hand sanitizing on a regular basis to avoid spread from surfaces. It can stay depending on the nature of the surface for a variable length of time. We also have relative issues like how long it can survive on different surfaces, handling disinfection procedures, and so on that will clear it. Coming to the role of masks, obviously, we will be discussing in detail a little later as well. The reason we stress on the mask is that's an effective way to spread the droplets going out of you into the air, whether you are coughing, sneezing, talking. So wearing a mask is a very important measure to limit the virus spreading in the environment. Of course, if you have a double ply or better masks, it will also reduce the viral load you receive from the other person. So the extent of spread depends on the distance from which you are from the person, the mask wearing of the people involved. So if both people are wearing a mask, there is more than 97% chance that the virus doesn't reach you. Even if it does reach you through side leaks or anything, the dose that you receive is very minimal. So we will come into the measures to reduce the risk of infection as we go on as well. The next important point that I would like to stress here is, does it spread by aerosol? Medical professionals working in the field are very worried about aerosol because the dose generated is quite high during procedures like intubation, nebulization, and airway related support like ventilatory support, where the gas might be coming out, and also positive airway pressure or high flow through the nose. So medical personnel who are actually involved in aerosol generating procedures near the patient have to wear a specific type of respirator called the N95 mask or a similar equivalent, that is to filter the particles to more than 99%. And so not every public who is going to the outside areas needs to wear such masks. A normal mask is enough. However, compliance to mask wearing is very important. In terms of public health measures, all of us have seen very confusing statements from WHO, from the United Nations, from the United States and various countries. The leaders are confused. It's obvious that it's not an easy task how you respond to such a situation. We are facing such a situation for the first time, and so we have to be clear about our understanding that the politicians are in a difficult role as well. So an overview of the illness in children. So we don't have as much of a severe illness in children, thankfully. And the CDC reports that about 8 per 100,000 children may need hospitalization. So that's a fairly low number. If you compare with adults with the severe infection, it can go up to 160 per 100,000. However, once you are admitted, the risk of needing intensive care progression is about 3 per admission. So, I mean, 3 out of 3% of the admission. So it's very difficult to be clear about once you get admitted, you may need intensive care. I think it's 3 out of 10 admissions, sorry. So in terms of neonates, we have pregnant women who may have coronavirus infection. There has not been much evidence of in utero transfer, which is called vertical transmission. So that's good news as well. There have been occasional reports, but it is difficult to be sure. It obviously depends on the viral spread in the body, the so-called viremic phase when the infection is happening. And obviously, reports have not confirmed that there is a significant vertical transmission of the virus. However, the newborns are at risk of acquiring the infection from the carers after the delivery as well. So the current recommendation is not to separate the mother from the baby as far as possible. If the mother is unwell, if she has a pneumonia or she needs intensive care, obviously that's not feasible and the baby has to be handled by carers who take the precautions themselves. We send a COVID test for the baby if the baby is symptomatic early on. If the baby is asymptomatic, we can either observe the baby or do a test, and this is still evolving. It depends on the cost implications and so on as well. The advice for the mother rooming in with the baby mainly is that there should be a distance of 2 meters between the crib and the mother, because the mother may not wear the mask all the time. If the mother goes within 2 meters to handle the baby or to do a procedure on the baby like changing nappy, she needs to wear a mask. Breastfeeding is acceptable as well. Transmission through breast milk is not been shown definitively, even though there have been reports which show that breast milk may have the viral particles cases confirming infection spreading through the breast milk is very limited. There has been a recent report from Cornish Hospital in UAE as well, which has confirmed that they had 73 mothers with COVID infection, of which none of them had the infection. We have published a series from our own hospital as well with 10 mothers who had the COVID, and obviously 2 babies had the positive test, but we don't know if the baby had the infection or not. They were asymptomatic. So breastfeeding is still the best feeding unless the mother is sick. If the mother is unwell, she can still express milk and give. And if she wears a mask, if she practices adequate hand hygiene, breastfeeding is fine. And most of the adults, the healthy adults, do not get a severe infection as well. I mentioned about the statistics in the beginning, but the mortality rate has been stabilizing in the healthy population, in the healthy adult and children population. It's 0.5% or so. That is the rate we are seeing currently in the United Arab Emirates. In the bigger countries which have a higher older age population, we are seeing a 3.3% to 5% mortality rate, depending on the country we are talking about. It's still a very high mortality rate in the high risk individuals. So if you have a high risk individual in the family, we strongly recommend that you take as many stringent measures as you can to prevent the virus. If you are healthy people living together, a family of 2 healthy adults and children, you don't need to panic. However, you need to be sensible. You need to take all the precautions recommended. So this is the two groups that we will talk about. Sick neonates are not common. We have not had that many babies in the neonatal intensive care unit with COVID. However, there have been reports of newborns, especially premature babies born after COVID infection in the mother, who have been sick. They didn't isolate the coronavirus, but the baby was ventilated and baby had multi-system failure. Whether it was due to the virus or due to the prematurity, it's hard to be clear. In terms of how we deal with the infection, so we have various factors. In older children, very rarely we have reported a multi-system inflammatory syndrome. This is nothing to be scared of because the number of cases that are reported are low. It seems to be more in the European or Caucasian population compared to colored skin. This could be due to the way our antigenic makeup is linked to our human leukocyte antigen type or major histocompatibility complex. So there may be genetic variations which predispose the way our immune system responds. So this is typically a syndrome which happens 2 to 4 weeks after exposure to the coronavirus infection. Whether the child had a symptomatic infection or just a asymptomatic infection doesn't matter at this stage. And subsequent to that, the child gets involvement of the skin, the respiratory tract, the cardiovascular system, the joints, and so many other organs can be affected, the kidneys as well. Sometimes it presents as a mimic of Kawasaki syndrome, which is present with the features like conjunctivitis, lymph node enlargement, inflamed tongue, peeling of the skin, and heart problems. The heart problems may be dilatation of the heart vessels called the coronary vessels. We may also have problems like myocarditis, where the heart muscle does not function normally. However, this is a rare complication. The typical presentation in children is with upper respiratory infection or a fever, which is low grade. As the child gets older, we have more of a sore throat-like presentation. Cough may be a feature as well. Gastroenteritis has been described, and in our practice, we have seen children presenting with just vomiting and diarrhea, testing positive for the COVID. So how do we diagnose the problem? We can diagnose the problem predominantly by reverse transcriptase PCR testing. The swab is typically taken from the nasopharynx. We put the probe into the nose, directed backwards to the back of the throat, which is the nasopharynx. And the positivity rate, the sensitivity is about 70%. So we can still have 30% negative despite having the infection. The test which is most sensitive is secretions from the airway. However, that only happens in symptomatic patients. So if you have lung disease, then they can isolate from those secretions. But in healthy individuals, in nasopharynx, reverse transcriptase, at least 2 viral antigens should be tested for it to be confirmed positive, and different labs produce different types of tests. We have the antibody tests as well, and we have the immunoglobulin types IgM and IgG. IgM can be non-specific, though it reacts quicker, and IgG is more specific because they are looking at specific components. And we may use a combination of the IgG and IgM as well. So the diagnostic turnover time, we have rapid tests which can diagnose as quickly as 2 hours, even for the reverse transcriptase PCR tests. We have normally a 1-day turnaround time now. Home to test is also being debated by the governments. The more testing, the more quarantining, the the more limitation of spreading. So obviously countries which have made a proper testing protocol are stringently looking into it, are more likely to be successful in their control. But as I said before, the idea of lockdown is to limit the spread, to reduce the numbers. So don't panic that the numbers are still high, because we are not in a lockdown phase. We do need to open up the economy. We have to be sensible, avoiding crowded areas, avoiding gatherings. These are very important, and we need to follow those measures. So regarding children and treatment of COVID, basically like any viral infection, treat the symptoms, treat the fever. If the child has fever, make them rest, keep them well hydrated. There is no specific treatment for the virus needed in these situations. Even in sick patients, we need the supportive treatment in majority of the situations. Treatments like antiviral drugs, as azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, and steroids have been tried. The steroids may have some benefit in improving. Some antivirals have been shown to be beneficial, but these are needed only in very few patients. So majority of the patients need only supportive treatment. If you have a need for oxygen, so this saturation monitoring is very important. If you have any breathing difficulty, you should be checked. Always report your symptoms early, because there are cases reported where the progress to pneumonia and cardiac arrest is fairly rapid in some cases. So we should be reporting any breathlessness. If it is a baby, you need to watch for fast breathing, difficulty in feeding, and obviously if their color changes to dusky color or anything. If they have dehydration, we should be monitoring them as well. So indication for admission in a child would be significant illness. So mild symptoms, whether it is COVID or any other virus, your approach is the same. However, take extra precautions to avoid spreading in the family. Take the preventive measures as I discussed earlier, social distancing even at home, wash their clothes separately. If you are handling them, wear a mask, possibly wear gloves or wash your hands thoroughly before and after. So don't panic if a parent is affected and you still have to look after your baby. Take these precautionary measures, avoid kissing the child, avoid going close to the child, avoid speaking loudly, wear a mask all the time, and you're likely to limit spread. There have been, even in today's newspaper, there was a case where both the parents were affected, but the two children were not affected at all. So we also have our own colleagues where the same situation is applied. So I've seen many parents messaging me that they are infected and they're very worried about the baby. If you don't have elderly people, if you don't have obese or diabetic people or people with chronic lung disease in your family, please don't panic. Take all the precautionary measures, limit the dose that reaches the patient, your child or contact, and hopefully the infection will not happen. However, if the symptoms are significant, you may consider testing them or taking them to hospital to test them. And if the symptoms progress, you may need hospitalization. Obviously, the government strategies are changing. Previously, all the hospitals were encouraged to take COVID patients, but currently in UAE at least, there are centers which are focusing on COVID, and most of the regular hospitals are COVID-free at the moment. And that makes sense, as it gives more confidence to the public to come to the hospitals for routine problems like vaccination. So this brings us to the question of what to do for regular testing, regular checkups, regular vaccination. So all the hospitals are following stringent measures to reduce the spread of infection. Proper disinfection is being taken care of. The physicians and the nurses are taking care to wear gloves when they contact. They are wearing the mask as well, which will separate. Of course, young children don't wear masks, but don't panic, as the physician, all the hospital staff are also screened as they enter the hospital. If there is any concern of contact, they are unlikely to be working. So don't be worried about the child not wearing a mask, as the contact is very limited. And vaccination is very important, because vaccination protects against multiple diseases. I would refer you to watch my video on vaccines and immune response earlier in the channel. They are very important. Vaccine protected diseases are serious conditions, and if we don't vaccinate, the herd immunity may come down. Actually, you may see an increase in the infections from those. Like, we are seeing a rise in measles infection, we are seeing a rise in pertussis infection. Of course, it's very important to keep on top of the vaccine. So take the precautions that are due. You can go to the hospital after an appointment, and all the hospitals don't double book. And because the overall infection rate in the community has dropped, this is true. One of the reasons the infection spread is by droplet spread, and most of the viruses spread the same way. Mostly we get a virus, and on top of that, a bacterial infection catches hold. So all of us have seen a huge drop in infections, in admissions in both children and adults, and our OPDs are not busy at all these days. It's very good news for everyone because infections have come down. And of course, hospitals are worried about the business, but that's not the key. The health of the community is the key. So we have to be aware that infection rate in the community overall has dropped. Of course, the focus is on coronavirus, and we should do our best to limit the spread. But the good news is there that other morbidities have dropped significantly. So be confident coming to the hospitals. You can delay the vaccines by 2 weeks or so, but delaying beyond that is not ideal. And take a suitable appointment and visit the physician. So some of you had mentioned this in your comments. So I would reassure you, go to your pediatrician, get a regular check. And for a child who has acute problems, of course, my videos would guide you that you don't need to worry too much about minor infections if the child is well. So do the symptomatic treatment. However, if you're worried, especially if the child is under 3 months of age, you should definitely review. So don't delay your review because that may lead to complications and you may even miss serious problems. So that is important that you don't take the precautions and go to the hospital. In terms of preventive measures, so we have the social distancing, which has been drummed into us right from the past 6 months. So the measures of social distancing have been evolving. So initially we were in a lockdown. We had issues related to how to manage it. As I said, in the United States, only recently they started using masks in public. Even in the UK, in the first 3 months of the pandemic, it wasn't clear advice. In Italy, they imposed lockdowns in pockets, and then the widespread lockdown started. Masks wearing was not well applied in many of the European countries. However, I should congratulate the UAE government for stressing on the importance of masks. And in India as well, there has been a huge stress on use of masks. So compliance varies, of course, and it's very important that we follow it as best as we can. In terms of children and masks, children under 2 years of age, masks are not easily handled. They may not be able to remove it if they feel suffocated, and they may obstruct their breathing. So we don't recommend masks for children under 2 years of age. More than 2 years, if the child is going to be sitting in a classroom, for example, under 6 years, a mask is not deemed compulsory, but social distancing measures should be stringently followed. So if you do decide to send your young child to the nursery, if the nursery is open, you may consider mask on the route, but in the school, they may not wear the mask. Don't be panicking about it because the teachers will be aware. In terms of 6 years and above, we should use a double ply mask at least because you need the double ply to reduce the risk. It should be made of a material which is allowing you to breathe. So don't make a synthetic material like vinyl, which will make it more difficult and it may be suffocating. It should be washable. It should be reusable, preferably. The hospital grade surgical masks can be used, but they add to your recyclable waste. And so a washable cloth mask, which is washed on a regular basis, should be used. We should teach the children how to handle the mask. So it should be covering the nose, the mouth, and it should be below the chin. And there shouldn't be a significant gap, and they should be handling it by the loop or the string. Loops are easier for children to handle. If the child has glasses, the fogging may be an issue, so you may have a nose clip, which can reduce the fogging reaching the glasses. So previously, I used to struggle wearing masks when we enter the OT, but now we have got used to it. And the initial fogging, you just lift your glass a bit and then it adjusts itself. It's very important to avoid leaks around it, but of course, a non respirator type of masks may not have a tight seal. Some leak is inevitable. That's why there is still a small risk, and both individuals involved should be wearing a mask for the same reason. Encourage the child to keep the mask all the time, and obviously you have to teach them how to remove it appropriately, not to touch the front, not to keep adjusting it, to avoid touching any part of the face, because the face has mucous membranes in the eyes, in the nose, and in the mouth. And mucous membranes are very vascular. If you have the organism, they can enter into the bloodstream quite easily. So hand disinfection is very important. Teach them to use. In children under 6 years in the schools, they don't recommend keeping hand sanitizers because there is a risk of ingestion. Hand washing with soap should be encouraged even at home. We have had many cases coming with dry skin because of the repeated use of hand sanitizers. Don't be paranoid. If you are in the home environment, if you're just using your regular handling and no one in the family has infection, you don't need to keep washing your hands. When you go outside, when you touch the elevator, when you touch the handrails, avoid touching anywhere if possible. But if you do have to touch, use a knuckle, or there are devices you can use to touch. So the minimal touching reduces the need for using the hand sanitizer. Of course, be aware of whenever you have touched something which is inevitable, like a card machine in the shop or taking something in the shop, you use the hand sanitizer after that episode. And during that episode, remember to not to touch your face. Wearing gloves is one way to remind you not to touch the face, but a glove should not be worn all the time. It should be for those specific activities, like I said, during the shopping, while pushing the trolley, for example. So it does remind you not to touch your phone, not to touch your face, and so on. And the same applies to the child as well. So don't let the child carry a phone outside the home, because you can't be telling them to not to touch the phone. It's more difficult. They so throw tantrums. So better not to let them handle any devices outside the home. But once in the home, you sanitize it first, and then they can use it if it's appropriate for them, like for schooling and so on. Of course, limiting screen time still applies in these days of lockdown and online learning. So use it for essential screen time, but not unlimited. It's very important for the young kids. They copy the older kids and want to sit in front of the screen, and you can watch the video on screen time, and so it's harmful. And in terms of the face shields, I mean, they are used in certain circumstances where you have to have lip reading, for example, in schools where the children are having a learning difficulty. Uh, but as a routine, the face shields are not required. And if you use a face shield without a mask, they should be full length, they should cover below the chin, and ideally they should be closed as well. So even if you have a visor on the face shield, you should have a mask on to prevent the risk, unless it's a full face shield. Even for a child, there is no need, because there is a lot of opening on the side. If you're not wearing a mask, if you're just wearing a feet, it's mainly meant to reduce splashing for the medical personnel. So public taking it is not essential. And of course, the social distancing is very important, and we should be careful to teach the child to stay away. In the case of children under 2 years, when you're going to public places, you're not putting a mask on the child. So make sure that you're turning the child away from the person who is speaking if you do need to encounter someone. Don't take the children to crowded places as far as you can, because you cannot control how they run about. And if they do need to go outside, limit the time that you're outside. Of course, you can go for play areas and so on, but where there is minimal contact with surfaces. And swimming is an activity you can encourage. However, you should be careful to social distance in the changing areas and clean the hands thoroughly after the swimming. Most of the pools are taking stringent measures to reduce the spread of infection. They're adding salt to the water as well. I stressed earlier that if you have high risk people in the family, like elderly people, you should take more stringent precautions. Some sacrifices may be needed, like avoiding going to the social areas, avoiding going to the malls. So keep your supermarket visits to the minimum. Plan what you're shopping. Don't stay too long in crowded areas. It was an interesting video I saw today that they have a robo which is based on artificial intelligence. It can take pictures of the people in the supermarkets without their being aware. And if you are not wearing your mask properly, it can feed back to the till operators who would recognize you, and which would alert you as they reach the till. You may be fined. So be careful when you go to the supermarkets, wear your mask properly, because artificial intelligence will catch you out. So coming to the point about school, obviously, school is of great importance to the children. It has a lot of importance in terms of their social understanding, interacting with colleagues, and opening of schools is a good thing. We should encourage, but at the same time, the schools are also taking a lot of measures, and the DHA, the health authority, has put down very stringent guidelines to the schools on what to do if there is a suspected infection. It has given guidelines to parents on what to do if your child has even a cold. So online learning options are also available in every school. Don't send your child to school in cases where there is a suspicion, and always take the precautions. If you know that the child has come in contact, err on the side of caution, select for online learning. The schools are flexible. They have been told not to mark the attendance stringently. Online learning is equal to school learning in such situations. So you can do your bit to the community by reducing the risk of the child spreading infection. If your child is in school and has come in contact with someone who has an infection, make sure there is no ostracizing the other child, there is no name calling, and obviously no stigma should be attached, because it could happen to anyone. We have the infection in the community. Any of us could come in contact. The infection can come from school, it can come from home, and it can be carried to the school. And the schools have been advised to contact trace. So those who are within 2 meters distance for more than 15 minutes are selected, and they are sent home for that 2-week period of isolation till the positive child, from the time of exposure to the positive child. And children are very sensitive. We should be able to explain to them in a gentle way what this infection is, why social distancing is important. We should put it in child-friendly terms, and don't panic them. They can be stressed very easily. Same for you as well. Don't panic, and be sensible, follow these measures. And lastly, we should be optimistic. It has been a very negative period. So we should be optimistic that the world will come around all these problems. We will definitely come out of this crisis. It's going to take time. It's going to take a few months or 1 to 2 years even. We cannot predict how long, because the numbers are still rising all over the world. Vaccine trials are going on. I mentioned in my earlier live post last week that vaccines are being tried, and different types of vaccines are being tried. We have vaccines from China, we have vaccines from Russia, we have the Oxford vaccine trial, we have the US vaccines. All of them are in advanced stages, clinical phases, and some of them have successfully passed the first stage of the clinical phase, which is a safety phase. And that vaccine is being tried on frontline staff, teachers, and so on as well on a basis. But however, we should remember that the proving of efficacy of the vaccine is only when it can be shown that those vaccinated definitely have a lower rate of infection or a milder infection. So obviously both are important, and if you are able to have a milder infection, you are less likely to be symptomatic for a longer time. You may not spread as much in the community. And overall, as we all get exposed, I told you in the beginning that the reason it is spreading very fast is because our immune system is naive. As we get more mature, as our immunity is exposed, all of us are going to have some herd immunity, even though to viral infections, our herd immunity is not very strong. That is one of the reasons why a virus like influenza virus keeps mutating. We need a special strain of the vaccine every year. There was a query from the parents who had emailed me to ask that their child is not being exposed to other children. They are not going to school. The parents are living in a villa. They are not going to be exposed to other children. Do they still need the flu vaccine? So the answer is that it is sensible to take the flu vaccine in under 3 or in high-risk children. Some people say under 5 years of age. However, in a situation as you described, it is left to the choice of the family. It's an optional vaccine, and the likelihood of the influenza spreading in the community also is quite low at this stage. I mentioned in the beginning that the number of infections we see is quite low. So there is a possibility that you may get away with it, but vaccination is like insurance. So you may prove it if anything happens. So you may err on the side of caution if you have any risk factors. So that is my take. I mean, obviously, but there is room to discuss about whether you definitely need it or not. And if you, for any reason, you don't want to take the vaccine in the current situation, if you have an elder sibling who is going to school, for example, or you have someone working in a high risk profession like in a healthcare profession, it's safer to take the vaccine for your child. But if you are having a first baby, one parent isn't working and the other parent is going to work and taking all the precautions for the COVID, which will also prevent the influenza, you may get away without giving it. But this is not a recommendation. This is consideration of the situation. And if the situation changes, you have to evaluate, because the season lasts for 6 to 8 months. So you make an ongoing assessment of the same. So there are a few questions now. I hope what we discussed till now is useful, and we will go on to the question stage. If infection has come down, how have the cases increased? So I didn't say that the infection has come down. I mean, I said that we are able to regulate the infections, but as more people come out, as more people interact, the infection is likely to spread. So the cases are still increasing. This is a stage where herd immunity is likely to build as more cases in the community happen, and it's building at a pace where the healthcare system is not being swamped. I said that at least in the UAE, the COVID cases are being handled in a central way, but we are not hearing of any centers being swarmed. We are still able to manage the intensive care. The number of deaths in the UAE, for example, is 0.5%, so it's not a very high rate. And Dr. Sania has asked, how can we protect unmasked toddlers when taken outdoors? So I mentioned that earlier when we discussed. So just to take the precautions that we are not taking them to crowded areas. We turn them away from people who are speaking. Of course, avoid elevators if you can, going with other people. If someone has sneezed in an elevator, for example, the air in the elevator may have the virus for a significant length of time. So many people have moved to the villa. If you can afford it, it's a good move. But obviously, if you can't afford it, don't panic. If it is one floor, for example, start using the stairs. Of course, you have to be safe. So do what is appropriate. And if you have to take the child in an elevator who doesn't wear a mask, you can have some form of temporary covering. So you can cover with the cloth or something as you go without suffocating. So that's very important as well. So there is a question from my cousin Jayanti on symptoms of COVID infection. So as I mentioned earlier, there may be asymptomatic children. 80% have mild symptoms, and about 15% may have moderate infection. Only 5% need intensive care. You have to have a clear picture that you may have fever, you may have headache, runny nose, cough, sore throat. These are the commonest. Some form of gastroenteritis may be there as well. So the symptoms can be quite varied. And if you have had a COVID infection earlier, you are at risk of developing a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in a small number. So if a rash or if a breathing difficulty or any other symptoms come up after a few days, we should be watching for that. So there is a question about a child who is 4.5 years old, whether he should take the 5-year vaccine. So the 5-year vaccine, there is a range between 4 and 6 years. So in this case, you are not in a hurry to give it. Of course, if the situation warrants and you decide to take the flu vaccine as well, you can always combine the visit and take the vaccines together. So you do have a range. So if you want to wait some time, it's fine. And I think we have covered most of the questions. I'll give you a couple of minutes to. So there is another question from Raki. Hi, Raki. So what are the initial symptoms of COVID-19? So you may not have any symptoms, or you may have a runny nose, you may have sore throat in an older child, and you may have fever, headache, loose stools. These may be the common symptoms, but you may not have any symptoms, or you may just have some weakness and tiredness. Most of the mild symptoms resolve in 2 days or so. So it's not any different from what we discussed earlier about mild viral infection. So I always tell you not to worry about viruses, and they will go away. Majority of the cases, it applies even for the coronavirus. That's why you don't need to be paranoid, be sensible. So how to handle in airport to avoid contact? So this is very important question, especially those who are planning to travel back. And I had a patient this morning as well who had the need to travel back because her mother is visiting and she wants to go back, and the mother who has just delivered also is going to accompany her. So it's very important that we try to keep a distance from the crowd, obviously, in the airport check-ins. Don't go to overcrowded areas. If you are able to wear a mask, you can wear a mask. If it is a young infant, you can keep the baby under your shawl or something so there is no direct exposure to droplets from others. Make sure that you're not overwrapping the child. Make sure that there is no risk of suffocation. So this is very important. The risk from a virus coming into the baby is not very high, but if someone coughs or sneezes or you have some concern, you can always shield the child with your, if you're wearing a churidar, for example, with the dupatta of the same, or if you're wearing a sari, you can wrap this baby in a shawl. You can carry a separate cloth which you can safely cover, like I told you, in the elevator, or same in the plane as well. Of course, it's not possible to cover that for the entire journey. You can request for a seat if you have a small baby or a child, or if you are yourself a high risk, you can request for a seat right in the front or in front of the barrier, so at least your exposure is limited. So swimming in the beach and chances of COVID infection. So thank you, Dr. Ashok, for attending this session and for this very valuable question. I mentioned about the swimming pool that they're adding the chlorine, as well as adding more salt to the water to try and inactivate the virus. If you take the precautions in and out of the pool and social distancing when you're in the changing rooms, hand sanitizer use after you have had the swimming session, you're reasonably safe. However, in the beach also the same precautions apply. You may consider sunscreen if you're going in the sun, and you can watch the video on sun protection as well that I have on the channel. So obviously COVID in a beach is not very crowded. You have a vast distance where you can socially distance. So select your spot and don't be near others. Seawater is naturally salinated, so it has anti-infective properties. There are some discussions and some reports of seawater nasal sprays, which may reduce the chance of infection. So people may start recommending you to do it when you come home if the child will cooperate or an adult may use. So there is a question on, is it advisable for children to take packed foods? So if you mean food cooked outside, obviously it depends on the nature of the food we are talking about. If it is a food which is well cooked in a place where you know is reliable for their precautions, it's okay to take, but you may need to clean the outside of the container. Of course, all the delivery people are taking the precautions as well these days, so it's important that we take a reliable service, we choose a reliable restaurant, we choose a type of food which is fully cooked. So don't take partially cooked food. Avoid giving salads from outside unless you wash them yourself. And under 2 years of age, we don't recommend giving outside food anyway. So I think we have come to the end of the session now. I hope it is useful, and a recorded version will be available on the channel as usual for you to share with your friends. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for your kind inputs. If you have any further questions, you can leave in the comment section either here or in the video that will be added, and I would be very happy to answer them. Thank you, and stay safe.